Grace, switch to charge.
Yeah.
Corin, switch to charge. Corin, recharge.
Yes, sir.
Corin, switch to pistol.
Hell yeah!
Corin, move to Alpha 8. Miranda, switch to sniper.
Understood.
Video games have had a shoddy history with input methods that stray too far from either a mouse and keyboard or a standard console controller. Nintendo ushered in an era of motion controls that disappeared as quickly as it arrived, and Microsoft is now just easing off their push to make Kinect a part of your living room. One thing that the Kinect did kind of well, but not really, was voice controls. There have been games with voice control in the past, but they never worked well enough to be something that you actually wanted to use. Iridium Studios seeks to change that with There Came an Echo, a real-time squad tactics strategy game that you can control with your voice. Right off the bat, the game has you play out what is essentially the scene from The Matrix where Morpheus guides Neo out of his office building. It was neat to finally have a game where you get to play out a scenario like this from Morpheus' perspective, and The Matrix continues to influence further aspects of the story as time goes on. From that first scenario, they built a rudimentary real-time XCOM on top of the voice controls. Calling the characters by name, you can order them to move, focus fire on an individual target, revive another character, and so on. Voice commands proved to be very responsive, though not perfect. There's a command alias feature where you can type in custom commands for the game to interpret if you find yourself having trouble getting the game to recognize what you're saying. Using the default commands, at least in regards to the way I speak, the game had a hard time hearing me pronounce one of the four main characters' names, and it had a hard time telling the difference between Alpha and Delta. And seeing as the name uses the NATO phonetic alphabet to tell your units where to go, that can be a bit problematic. A bit more focus on my enunciation helped, but really the command alias was the better solution. There's a training area in the main menu that you can use while you test out different commands and command aliases. The other thing to keep in mind about the voice commands is that you really should be playing this game with a headset microphone. I really mean that, and the game isn't shy about pointing this out to you either. I'm recording this audio right now with a snowball microphone about 2 feet away from me, but that's not good enough for There Came an Echo. It needs to be basically right in front of my mouth for it to consistently register the commands, as shouting from further away doesn't really work either, which is another thing that the game makes sure to spell out for you. So with just those few caveats, the voice commands were a nice way to interact with the game, and really made it feel like something unique, though it does allow for more traditional inputs if it has trouble recognizing your voice or your language. As for the game itself lying underneath the input device, you get a slow build-up to a more mechanically interesting game where you have to manage multiple objectives, enemies coming from different directions, level designs with choke points and other things that you have to strategize around, and then the game's over. It took me about 3.5 hours to finish the game, which was really disappointing because I hadn't had that much time to really play with the systems of the game after the tutorials were done. I've got nothing against short games at all, but I would hope that I've gotten my fill of the game by the time I put it down. My biggest concern is that perhaps they stopped adding gameplay scenarios because there was no more room for them in the game's story. You get 4 pretty by-the-numbers character tropes and character motivations and dialogue that would be right at home on a cartoon aimed at a pre-teen demographic. Think something like Teen Titans, for example. That is, if Teen Titans allowed swears. I'm very much not a fan of that part of the story, but then there's the deeper theme and subplot about the nature of God sprinkled throughout the story that intrigued me and made me want to see the story through to the end. Even here, the payoff was still disappointing. This, ultimately, is the reason that I was upset about the game's length, because so much of it is spent on a story that I was underwhelmed by. With the recent release of The Order 1886, people have called out that game as being not only very short, but also filling a lot of that short amount of time with cutscenes. I did a rough count of gameplay time in There Came an Echo because a similar thought crossed my mind. Out of the 3.5 hours I spent with the game, just short of 2 hours of that was actually time spent in the gameplay scenarios and outside of scripted story events. Other than using the practice area as a sort of horde mode, there's not really anything else available to you in this game, and there's no real character customization that would make you want to go back and try new strategies. It's a shame there's no multiplayer mode in this game either, because I'd actually like to play against other people, commander versus commander, in a squad combat game like this. As it stands though, the game here is just that 3.5 hour story mode. If that sounds like a good value proposition for the price you're paying, you'll find a good handful of tactical scenarios in here, and it's also impressive and fun technology, but I was certainly hoping for a bit more here.